The bridge of the tyrant's fist hummed with the low, rhythmic thrum of its power core, a steady pulse of energy that underscored the supreme confidence of those aboard. Overlord Zyphar stood before the panoramic viewport, arms clasped behind his back, a smirk curling at the edges of his thin, violet lips. Below, Earth sprawled in all its primitive insignificance, a relic of war-ravaged continents, sluggish development, and outdated weaponry that should have been discarded millennia ago. Is this truly the best humanity has to offer? Zyphar's voice dripped with derision as he turned toward his advisors. Steel-plated ground crawlers and chemically propelled projectiles? This planet is little more than a graveyard of obsolete warfare. His second-in-command, strategist Cordell, chuckled, his 4 eyes gleaming under the bridge's cold luminescence. Our analysts confirm, my lord, their technology is stagnant. Ballistic-based weapons, crude combustion engines, and no shields to speak of. They fight like the primitive worlds we crushed centuries ago. Zyphar exhaled, not with frustration, but with boredom. The conquest of Earth was to be his final campaign before assuming a seat among the Empire's Grand Council. Yet the challenge was proving to be non-existent. Where was the resistance? The desperate last stand? Even now, his forces had established control on Mars, using it as a staging ground for their planetary descent. Entire legions of Imperial foot soldiers stood in perfect formation aboard their landing craft, awaiting the order to deploy. With a lazy wave of his hand, Zyphar signaled the invasion's commencement. The first wave touched down with mechanical precision. Towering assault walkers emerged from their deployment bays, their sleek, insectoid legs unfazed by Earth's gravity. The ground forces followed, rows of silver-armored soldiers marching in step, plasma rifles locked into position. Above them, Imperial airships hovered like predatory birds, scanning for signs of human opposition. And then the tanks rolled in. At first, the Imperial commanders mistook them for wreckage, the way they clunked forward, belching thick, black smoke from their rear exhausts. The lead tank, a battered hulk of steel with faded desert camouflage, trundled into view with almost comical defiance. The hull bore battle scars, a testament to wars fought long before the Empire had even turned its gaze toward Earth. The designation M1 Abrams was stenciled in chipped paint along its side. Cordell let out a bark of laughter. They send relics to meet us. Zyphar tilted his head, intrigued but unimpressed. A curiosity. Humor them. Let them fire the first shot. The Empire's front line remained still, their polished ranks gleaming under Earth's sun. Plasma rifles hummed, held at the ready but unfired. The human tank stopped. A beat passed, then another, and then, with a deafening roar, its main cannon erupted. The shot slammed into the nearest Imperial hovercraft, a direct hit against its gravitic stabilizers. A moment later, the sleek vehicle lurched sideways before crashing to the ground, its anti-grav plates sputtering with uncontrolled energy. The explosion came next, a bloom of orange and black fire that shattered the air, sending nearby troops scrambling for cover. A stunned silence followed. Zyphar's smirk disappeared. Cordell's mandibles twitched. An inconvenience. The command relay crackled with disbelief as the ground forces attempted to regain control. Minimal damage, reported an officer hastily. One of our scout vehicles neutralized, but their attack is outdated. Crude. And yet, as more M1 Abrams tanks emerged from behind the hill, their treads grinding against the dirt, Zyphar noted something unsettling. These weren't mindless machines, nor were they operating on outdated doctrine. They were coordinated, deliberate, and worst of all, effective. Another round fired, followed by a second and third. Plasma bolts streaked in response, sizzling through the air in bright arcs of blue, but the Abrams tanks did not falter. Their thick armor absorbed the glancing shots, and the Imperial's so-called superior weapons failed to punch through their dense composite plating. A group of soldiers, unwilling to wait for their commander's orders, rushed forward, energy rifles locked on target. The human response was immediate. Machine guns mounted atop the tanks swiveled into position, their barrels spitting a near-unbroken stream of lead. The Imperial troops never reached their targets. Cordell's confident expression began to waver. "That shouldn't be possible." "Shouldn't be," Sci-Fi echoed, watching as another of his light vehicles took a direct hit and crumpled like paper. He turned to the command deck, gesturing sharply. "Deploy the Striders. End this farce before I grow impatient." Down below, the tide of battle shifted again. Bipedal combat walkers, sleek and bristling with high-energy weaponry, moved into position, their sensors locking onto the nearest Abrams. These machines, each towering over the battlefield, were the Empire's answer to armored resistance. Fast, heavily shielded, and equipped with energy lances capable of melting through reinforced structures. The lead walker fired. A blinding spear of light shot forward, striking the Abrams square in the hull. Smoke billowed outward, shrouding the machine in thick, acrid clouds. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the tanks surged forward. It was impossible. The Strider's plasma lance should have vaporized it in an instant. Yet, the Abrams emerged from the smoke, armor blackened but intact, its cannon already rotating toward its attacker. There was no hesitation, no pause, just a single brutal shot. The Strider didn't explode. It simply ceased to function. The kinetic energy penetrator slammed through its core, piercing the cockpit in an instant before exiting out the other side. The Imperial pilot never had time to react. A second walker fell, then a third. The battlefield erupted into chaos as the impossible became reality. The Empire's troops, accustomed to fighting enemies who cowered before their superior technology, now found themselves being slaughtered by an enemy that should not have stood a chance. Sci-Fi's fingers clenched into fists. This was not a battle. This was humiliation. His command console flared with incoming reports. Losses were mounting. The M1 Abrams tanks were no longer just surviving, they were winning. Even as the Imperials attempted to adapt, counterfire was proving ineffective, their weapons designed to fight foes who relied on energy shielding, not crude, but absurdly resilient armor plating. Cordell shifted uneasily beside him. "Orders, my lord." Sci-Fi's gaze remained locked on the battlefield, his lips pressing into a thin line. This was not how it was supposed to go. And yet, even as his forces reeled, he refused to acknowledge defeat. He would crush them. "Send in the heavy walkers," he said at last. "Enough theatrics. It is time humanity learns its place." But deep in his mind, a new and troubling thought took root. Perhaps they already knew, and had simply been waiting for him to make this mistake. Sergeant Walker wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his headset, the distant thunder of cannon fire rattling through the thick hull of his M1 Abrams. The scent of oil and burnt propellant lingered in the confined space, mingling with the sharp tang of adrenaline. Outside, the battlefield was chaos. The Empire's forces, once a wall of unstoppable arrogance, were in disarray. "Target 2 o'clock. Another one of those chicken-legged bastards," came the voice of Corporal Vasquez, his hands steady on the loader's controls. Walker shifted his gaze to the periscope. The Imperial Strider loomed ahead, its sleek metallic limbs gliding effortlessly over the uneven terrain. Its energy lance flared, preparing to fire. "A PFSDS round up," shouted Private Harris from the loader's seat. Walker didn't hesitate. "Send it." The tank rocked as the main gun thundered. The sabot round punched through the Strider's thin underbelly, severing its central power core. The machine let out a screech of twisting metal before toppling forward, collapsing into a heap of burning wreckage. "One less to worry about," Vasquez muttered. Walker didn't respond. His eyes were already scanning for the next threat. The Imperials were adapting, but not fast enough. Plasma bolts streaked across the battlefield, impacting harmlessly against the tank's thick composite armor. The enemy had expected shields, force barriers, or anything resembling their own technology. What they got instead were rolling fortresses built to shrug off punishment and hit back twice as hard. The radio crackled. "Echo Squad, we've got incoming heavies from the east, big ones." Looks like Command's pets finally came out of play. Walker turned his attention to the ridgeline. His breath slowed. Imperial heavy walkers. They were unlike the smaller Striders his crew had been tearing through. These machines towered over the battlefield, each the size of a small building, plated in thick alloyed armor and bristling with plasma turrets. They moved with the weight of certainty, their steps shaking the ground as they advanced. Their shields, shimmering blue barriers of contained energy, pulsed with eerie confidence. Now that, Vasquez muttered, is a problem. Walker exhaled slowly. We'll make it their problem. He switched to the command channel. All tanks, shift fire. We focus one at a time. Overwhelm them. They're tough, but they aren't invincible. One of the heavy walkers opened fire first. A concentrated plasma beam lanced across the field, striking an Abrams directly in its turret ring. The explosion sent flaming debris into the air, the wreckage of the destroyed tank skidding across the dirt like a dying beast. Shit, Harris whispered. Walker gritted his teeth. Stay sharp. The Abrams tanks adjusted their formation. They didn't charge head first. That would be suicide. Instead, they spread out, using terrain and speed to their advantage. The Imperials had designed their walkers to combat other energy-based foes, not an enemy using kinetic weaponry and traditional maneuver warfare. Walker's tank moved into position behind a broken ridge, the chassis trembling slightly as Vasquez aimed the main gun. Fire. Another round streaked through the air, slamming into the leg joint of the nearest walker. The kinetic impact shattered its armor plating, exposing delicate servos beneath. A second tank capitalized on the opening, sending a follow-up shot directly into the weak point. The walker lurched, trying to compensate, before toppling onto its side with a ground-shaking crash. The Imperials hesitated. They had never seen their heavy walkers fall so easily. That hesitation was their undoing. The Abrams crews fought with precision. They focused their fire, striking weak points the Imperial engineers had overlooked: unshielded joints, power conduits, sensor clusters. One by one, the heavy walkers crumpled, their once imposing forms now burning wrecks dotting the battlefield. Not so tough when you bleed, huh? Vasquez muttered, slamming another shell into the breach. Walker allowed himself a grim smile. They thought war was about technology. It's about tactics. The enemy's lines faltered. Infantry scrambled for cover, their once imposing march now a desperate retreat. Some attempted to hold their ground, still believing in their supposed superiority. It didn't matter. The Abrams tanks cut through them like a scythe through dry grass. Walker scanned the battlefield, his fingers tightening around the controls. The Imperials were losing, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. This was too easy. The Empire wouldn't just accept this kind of defeat. His radio flared with an urgent transmission. Command to all forces. Satellites just picked up movement from orbit. They're preparing for a second wave. Walker's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. The Empire wasn't sending reinforcements. They were preparing for annihilation. The sky burned. High above the battlefield, the once pristine blue expanse was now streaked with fiery contrails as something vast and terrible descended from orbit. Sergeant Walker sat rigid in his seat, listening to the scrambled chatter over the radio. The Empire wasn't sending reinforcements. They were preparing to wipe the board clean. Command, confirm last transmission, Walker said, his voice steady despite the weight pressing against his chest. A burst of static, then the unmistakable voice of the battalion commander. It's what we feared. They're deploying an orbital bombardment platform. If they can't win the fight, they'll turn the ground to glass. Walker exchanged a glance with Vasquez. The corporal's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. Harris, hand still on the loader, swallowed hard. Outside, the wreckage of Imperial walkers smoldered, the battlefield littered with twisted metal and shattered bodies. They had won the fight on the ground. It meant nothing if the Empire was about to burn them from above. Walker took a breath. Command, how long do we have? Minutes. We're scrambling jammers now, trying to disrupt their targeting systems, but we need more time. Time. The one thing they didn't have. Walker flicked his eyes to the ridge ahead. Nestled between jagged rocks and the husks of ruined striders sat the downed wreckage of an Imperial command ship, still mostly intact. His mind worked quickly, piecing together a desperate plan. The Abrams tanks had proven resistant to the Empire's energy weapons. But they weren't just tough, they were mobile, adaptable, and above all else, underestimated. Vasquez, get me a firing solution on that wreck, Walker ordered, his voice sharp with intent. Vasquez blinked. Sir, are we seriously shooting at an Imperial command ship? I mean, I like blowing stuff up as much as the next guy, but we're not blowing it up, Walker cut in. We're using it. That ship had a direct uplink to their fleet before it went down. If we can punch through their encryption, we might be able to feed them bad targeting data, buy our jammers the time they need. Silence in the cabin, then a low whistle from Harris. That's either genius or suicidal. Walker smirked. And always? The turret adjusted, locking onto the exposed data relay on the wreck's hull. The Abrams fired. The sabot round struck true, not destroying, but puncturing the reinforced plating, exposing the ship's fragile inner workings. Walker switched channels. Command, we just opened a backdoor into their system. Get your tech boys working on it. A pause. Then, that's the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard, Sergeant. Stand by. Walker exhaled, gripping the controls tighter. Above them, the Imperial bombardment platform loomed larger, a behemoth of steel and plasma preparing to unleash its wrath. It was only a matter of time. Seconds passed like hours. Then, command to all forces. It worked. Their targeting array is scrambled. They're blind. A collective cheer erupted across the comms, but Walker wasn't celebrating yet. The platform wasn't firing, but it also wasn't retreating. It was hesitating. The realization hit him like a round to the chest. They're trying to recalibrate, he muttered. They won't stay blind forever. And the Overlord wouldn't accept a stalemate. As if in answer, a new transmission crackled through the Imperial channels, this one filled with fury. Overlord Zyphar's voice, no longer arrogant, but seething. You think this is over? You have merely delayed the inevitable. This world will belong to the Empire. Walker leaned forward, pressing the transmit button. Then come and take it. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, impossibly, the massive warship began to withdraw. One by one, the Empire's remaining forces turned tail, abandoning their positions, their once unshakable formation now a chaotic retreat. A roar of triumph swept across the battlefield. Humanity had not just survived, they had won. Walker allowed himself a breath, watching the last of the Imperial ships vanish into the upper atmosphere. This wasn't the end. The Empire would return. They would come with new strategies, new weapons, new horrors. But the next time they came, they wouldn't be underestimating humanity. And that, Walker thought, was their biggest mistake of all.